She was just trying to make it through another exhausting shift. Scrub-stained, feet aching, and a paycheck that barely covered rent. But in the quiet corner of the hospital, she let herself feel free. Just for a moment, she danced. No music, no spotlight, no stage, just joy. The kind that comes from the heart when no one's looking, except someone was behind the security cameras in a top-floor office. The billionaire CEO of the hospital chain had paused everything. He watched, he listened, and what he did next left everyone stunned. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Whether it's your first time here or you've been with us for a while, I appreciate you more than you know. If you love real, emotional, and unforgettable stories that remind us of the beauty in unexpected moments, this is your home. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who still believes in magic. Now, let's step into a story where one dance became a turning point and changed two lives forever. The security office was dark except for the bluish glow of the monitor. Graham Whitmore leaned back in the chair, his pressed shirt still perfectly crisp. Even at 11:47 p.m., he hadn't planned to be there, but insomnia, board pressure, and another email from his brother about donor pullout had driven him back to the hospital. The building was quiet, too quiet. He needed noise or distraction. He clicked through footage lobby cams. Parking lot feeds, delivery entrance. Nothing. Then he paused and a nurse was dancing. In a dim hallway near the east wing, she twirled a roll of gauze like a ribbon, music clearly playing her earbuds. She moved like no one was watching, uncoordinated but confident, loose brown hair in a messy bun, blue scrubs too big for her frame, white sneakers scuffed at the toes, but she danced with joy, unbothered, alive. He leaned forward, she spun, did a goofy finger point move like something from a 90s music video, then did a little hop on one foot. She laughed at herself. Alone, Graham didn't smile often, but something in his chest flickered, something unfamiliar. He reached for the volume knob on the security feed. Nothing, just silent footage of a woman dancing with a bag of fluid in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Then just as quickly she stopped, straightened her posture, checked her watch, and vanished down the hall. Like it never happened, he exhaled, closed the laptop. But the image wouldn't leave. Ella Brooks, that was her name, according to the night nurse rotation on his tablet. 28 RN night shifts, mostly in recovery, no disciplinary marks, no commendations, either a ghost in the system. He stared at the screen a little longer. Maybe that's why she stood out. She didn't try it on the third floor. Ella was wiping down a tray table when Tammy, her favorite non-nonsense head nurse, peeked into the room. "Girl, you out here twirling like nobody's business," she whispered, eyebrows raised. Elena blinked. "Wait, what?" Tammy smirked. "The night cameras got rhythm. Now you practicing for TikTok or therapy?" Elena's face flushed red. "Please tell me you didn't see that. Didn't have to security. Just called to ask what soundtrack they should add." She deadpan. "I told them Earth, Wind, Fire." Elena buried her face in her hands. "I swear, if anyone else saw that, I'm going to fake my death and move to Oregon." Tammy leaned against the door frame. "Relax, we've all danced with a supply cart. The question is why now?" Elena shrugged, still flushed. "I was just in the zone. Needed to breathe." "You ever feel like you're disappearing, like you clock and give everything and still float right through people?" Tammy's eyes softened. "Every damn day, sugar. That's why I sing to the bedpans when no one's looking at her, and to smile. You're good at this, Elena. You care they don't put that on the clipboard, but we see it." Ella nodded, gripping the edge of the tray. "It just feels like nothing changes. Patients and patients out management emails us about parking validation, like that's going to fix morale." Tammy looked around, lowered her voice. "I heard something tonight. With the boards getting edgy, Seal's been watching the building more closely. Walked in here at 10 like he owned the air. Rumor is he's planning cuts." Elena sighed. "Let me guess, cut supplies, not speeches." "Exactly." They stood in silence for a moment. Somewhere down the hall, a machine beeped. A baby cried faintly from pediatrics. Then Tammy said almost offhand, "You got more power than you think. People watch those who don't try to be seen." Ella raised an eyebrow. "That's poetic. You saving that for your memoir?" Tammy grinned. "Already titled How to Survive Healthcare Without Killing Nobody." Ella laughed, for real this time. But it faded quickly. She didn't feel powerful. She felt like a placeholder, a cog in a system that noticed her only when she messed up or filled someone else's shift. Her dance had been a rebellion, a private protest with rhythm and no agenda until someone had watched. Graham sat at the head of the lawn. Glass table, untouched black coffee in front of him. Morning sunlight spilled into the boardroom. Ella Marsh, board chairwoman, clicked her pen in irritation. "I'm telling you, Graham, we need a tighter image. Donors want clean stories, legacy, not chaos." Graham kept his face neutral. You mean silence. I mean dignity. He looked out the window toward the east wing. I watched a nurse dance last night. He said softly. Elena blinked. Excuse me, she was. Alone, no audience, just dancing. Is this a metaphor? Or are we wasting time? It reminded me what we've forgotten, people, not just numbers. Elena pursed her lips. We fund this hospital. You manage it. Stick to the roles. Graham's jaw tightened. Sometimes you need to listen to the hallway, not just the top floor, Eleanor. So then maybe you should take a walk down there more often. She left the door closed with a barely audible click. He stayed seated, the image of Elena, headphones and eyes closed, dancing like the floor was hers, looped in his mind, unapologetic. Free. What did it cost to feel that for 1 minute? Shantang at the nurse station. Elena checked her schedule, 3 doubles in a row, back-to-back recovery shifts. No time for dance breaks, no time to breathe. Kayla, the younger nurse, who idolized her, peeked over her shoulder. Hey, did you hear? She whispered. Please don't say what I think you can say. Someone on TikTok, said the CEO, is stalking night shift footage like actually watching Elena's heart. Stop, Kayla continued. They think he's looking for security problems, but I bet he's just bored and nosy or looking for people to fire. Elena muttered. Kayla giggled. Well, if he saw your dance, maybe he'll promote you to morale coordinator. Elena didn't laugh. Instead, she walked into the supply closet, shut the door, and leaned against the shelves of gloves and gauze. What if he had seen what if the most powerful man in the building now? Knew her not as a nurse, but as a woman who danced, keep from breaking her hands, trembled slightly as she pressed him to her face. Then she whispered, please let this all blow over. But outside, the story was just beginning. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me. Either way, Elena held the coffee tray with both hands, arms, tense palms, already sweating from the steam. 4 cups, 1 sugar-free, 1 black, 2 with almond milk, a small dish of lemon cookies on the side. She triple-checked the order. Just drop it off and get out, she muttered under her breath as the elevator climbed toward the executive wing. Don't speak, don't trip, don't breathe. Weird. She caught her reflection in the elevator's mirrored panel. Hair hastily tied back, shadows under her eyes, blue scrubs slightly wrinkled at the waist. Nothing about her said, I belong here. Still there. She was riding to the top floor, where everything smelled like money and decisions. Ding. The doors open with that delicate chime that made her stomach twist. The air was different up here, cooler somehow, scented with eucalyptus and something. Floor she couldn't name. The carpet muffled her steps, but her heartbeat felt loud enough to echo at the end of the hallway. The conference room door stood ajar. She could hear clipped voices, measured, controlled, not like the nurse's lounge where laughter and exhaustion lived in equal measure. She stepped forward, took a careful breath, and nudged the door open with her foot. Delivery for the $10,000 shirt club. She meant a joke in her head, but as she entered, her toe caught the edge of the rug. Time slowed. She tried to recover her knee. Buckled the tray, tipped. 4 cups flew one by one. They exploded onto the conference table. Like a choreographed disaster, coffee splashed across documents, ran down the sleek glass surface. 1 cup, the cursed black coffee, hit Graham Whitmore directly in the chest. The lid popped liquid, soaked his shirt, staining the crisp white fabric. In second silence, no one moved, not even the board chair. Elena Marsh, who stared with the expression of someone watching a chandelier fall in slow motion. Elena stood, frozen eyes wide, one hand still holding an empty cup like it might save her. Oh my God, she whispered. I tripped. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean. I'll clean it, please. Graham looked down at his chest, then back up at her. She braced for it, to look to reprimand the escort out instead. He said calmly, is it sweet? Her lips parted. I want the coffee. Is it sweet? She blinked. I think yes. I mean, it was a pause, and with the faintest curve of a smile, he said, good. I hate bitter coffee. Laughter rippled around the room, nervous at first, then real. A few directors chuckled. Even Elena smirked, though just barely. Elena stared at him, half in disbelief, half in awe. He had just been doused in hot coffee, and he was making a joke. I'll pay for the shirt, she blurted, crouching instinctively to gather the broken cups, her hands shaky, and the cookies and the papers, and maybe the carpet. I'll sell a kidney. Miss Brooks, he said, kneeling beside her, brushing a shattered lid toward the trash with his hand. You're not paying for any of it. She froze. You know my name. He gave a short nod. Of course, you're on third shift. Recovery? You've been working overtime for weeks. Elena's mind raced. How? Why? He added gently. And this shirt costs more than your car. Probably more than both of our cars combined. She let out a short, nervous laugh. Then I owe you 2 kidneys, he smiled. A real one, not the kind executives wear to. Fundraisers, the kind that catches you off guard. Someone cleared their throat. I'll call maintenance. Elena said dryly, already pulling her tablet away from the wet edge of the table. Elena rose, holding the ruined tray like a shield. I'm so sorry, she said again, her voice smaller. I didn't mean for any of these things happened, Graham interrupted his tone light. But his gaze steady go down the front desk, asked for a towel, take a breath. She nodded, turned on her heel, and practically ran the elevator, couldn't come fast enough. As soon as the doors closed, she leaned back against the wall, clutching the tray like it was her last possession. Brilliant Elena. She muttered, you just baptized the CEO in black coffee. She closed her eyes. I'm going to be fired. Definitely. Probably today. Maybe they'll make a public example of me. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that Graham back in the boardroom had already turned his assistant and said quietly, get me her file. That evening, the hospital grapevine was buzzing in the break room. Kayla whispered to two nurses, I heard she dumped coffee all over him. And he just laughed. He laughed one, asked ya. And then he knelt down to help her clean it up, no way dead serious. By the vending machines, the story had morphed. They said he asked for her by name, like actually said her name out loud, Elena something Tammy, heard it all, and just shook her head. This place never needed reality. TV, just give it one good spill back in her. Tiny apartment over pharmacy on Rutland Avenue, Elena sat cross-legged on her worn couch, replaying the moment. On a loop, the tray, the slip, the splash, his shirt, his voice. Is it sweet? She buried her face in her hands again. What was that? What kind of CO smiles through a coffee disaster and makes a joke? And why, despite the shame curling her gut, did it also leave something else behind? A pull of feeling she hadn't known in years. Not attraction exactly, but attention, real focus attention. From someone who wasn't rushing past her to page a doctor or demand a room change, someone who noticed her across town. Graham stood at his apartment window overlooking the quiet harbor. His dress shirt was ball let up in the laundry room, the stain still fresh. But it wasn't a stain he was thinking about. It was her face, her panic, her apology. And underneath all of that, her fire. He had watched her dance, then stumble, then face a room full of power with nothing but truth in her voice. Most people shrank in this building. She had stumbled into it and somehow stood taller by the time Elena clocked. And the next night, the story had evolved into legend. People didn't whisper in front of her, but the glances were louder than words. A receptionist paused longer than usual when handing her the patient reports. Dr. Willard from radiology gave her an awkward thumbs up in the hallway. Even Benny, the janitor, who rarely said more than 3 words, gave her a half smile as he passed by. She knew what they were all thinking. That's her, the nurse who spilled coffee on the CEO and lived to tell the tale. Tammy found her leaning over a supply cart, looking like she wanted to melt into the floor. You okay, sugar? Elena straightened. Fine. Just deciding whether I should keep my head down for the next 10 years or go full witness protection. Tammy snorted. I've been here 22 years. I've seen people fall asleep on patients, plug in a wrong for bag, even call a patient's husband their dad by mistake. But no one, and I mean no one, ever made the CEO laugh. Elena blinked. You think he laughed, honey? I heard it from 2 different floors. Man chuckled like someone told him his stocks went up and his ex got a parking ticket. Elena let out a breath. But was a relief. It was confusion. All day she'd been trying to convince herself the moment had passed, that it meant nothing. But it was everywhere, including her inbox at the end of her shift. As she finally sat to chart vitals, her hospital email pinged. From Graham Whitmore, subject, quick follow-up body. Elena, thanks for handling yesterday's unexpected moment with grace. I'd like to speak with you when you're available. Just a short conversation, GW. She read it twice, then 3 more times. Tammy walked by, caught the look on her face, and leaned in. Oh, what's that expression? You look like someone just found a letter from a secret admirer taped to their student loans. Elenina spun her screen around. He emailed me. Tammy whistled softly. Girl, that's either very bad or very interesting. I don't want it to be either, Elena said, slamming the laptop shut. I want it to be over. But it wasn't, Kay. The following morning, the executive floor felt different, quieter, like the air itself was holding its breath. Elena stood outside Graham's office, a crisp knock still echoing in the hallway behind her. His assistant, a woman with perfect posture and no visible warmth, had barely looked at her before gesturing to the door. She almost turned around, but the door opened. Miss Brooks, Graham said. Stepping aside, voice, even she stepped and tried not to stare. But it was hard not to notice the polished wooden bookshelves, the panoramic window, the desk that looked more like art than furniture. He motioned to a chair. Please. She sat back straight, heart a mess. He stayed standing for a moment, then sat across from her, not behind the desk, but at the small meeting table by the window. I want to thank you, he began, for how you handled the situation. Yesterday, most people would have panicked, some would have cried. I did both, Elenina said before she could stop herself. He smiled. Not in the boardroom. A beat of silence passed. Why me? She asked quietly, his brow lifted. You could have had someone else bring coffee or handle delivery or not know my name. I pay attention. He replied, Simply especially the people who do the real work around here. She swallowed. I'm just a nurse, you're not. Just anything. His tone wasn't flirty. It was firm, clear. Her breath caught. Then he said, and I've been reviewing. Internal reports there's a pattern in feedback from your unit patients. Mention your name often. I talk to them. That's all. That's everything. The compliment landed somewhere between her ribs and her spine. She didn't know what to do with it. I didn't bring you here to embarrass you. Graham continued. I want your help. Elena blinked. My help. He nodded. I'm creating a pilot program to assess patient experience on the inside. I need someone who understands both the chaos and the compassion of this place, someone who won't give me rehearsed answers. She stared at him. You want me what spy on my coworkers? No. He said with a small laugh, I want you to speak truth about what's working, what's broken, what we never see from up here. She hesitated. Why me? He looked at her, and for the first time his gaze softened, not as a CEO, but as someone a little tired of pretending, because when I saw you dancing, I saw someone who hadn't been seen in a long time, and someone who still chose joy anywhere her breath hitched. He stood, then walked back to his desk, picked up a file, and handed it to her. No pressure. Just think about it. She took the file. The folder was heavier than it looked. As she turned to go, he added, almost too casually, you have a way of cutting through noise, Elena. I could use a little more of that. She didn't look back until she was halfway down the hall. When she did, he was still standing there, watching, not with pity, with curiosity. Back in the staff break room, Tammy was sipping coffee and solving a crossword when Elena walked in, eyes wide. Okay, tell me everything, she said without even glancing up. Elena dropped the file on the table. He wants to consult. Tammy choked on her coffee. Consult on what? How to make coffee less explosive, on patient care, on the system, on what he doesn't. See, Tammy stared as is a joke. Like, is he testing you? I don't know, maybe. Elena sat down across from her, the adrenaline starting to crash. I've never been in a room like that, Tam. I kept thinking, what if I say something stupid? What if I freeze? What if I mess it up? Tammy leaned forward. You've already danced down a hospital hallway and turned a wardrobe malfunction into a miracle. If anyone can handle this, it's you. Elena exhaled. Outside the window, the morning light hit the garden courtyard. Just right, making the benches glow, the flowers look softer, the world slower. She opened the file. Inside were maps of patient flow, anonymous feedback from families, charts. Some made sense, some look like ancient scripts, but they're in bold print. On the first page were 6 words, handwritten in pen, honesty, over-polished. Tell me everything. She stared at the words, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled, not out of nerves, not out of fear, but because she realized something strange was happening. Someone had finally asked her to speak. And this time she might actually be heard. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me. Either way, Elena hadn't stopped thinking about the folder. It followed her into the break room, into recovery rooms, even into the corner booth at Myrtle's Cafe, where she sat with her untouched sweet tea and too much spiraling thought. Tammy slid into the seat across from her, holding a plastic cup of peach cobbler like it was a trophy. You look like you've seen a ghost, Tammy said, peeling off the lid. Or worse, a grand proposal. Elena gave a weak smile and tapped the manila folder sitting between them. Worse, a job offer. I don't know how to do. Tammy dipped her spoon and pointed it like a wand. You've been doing that job for years, just without the paycheck or the title. It's not the same. This is higher up people in suits, people who say things like scalable improvement models and multi-phase outcomes. While I'm over here trying to get 4 pumps to stop beeping at 3 a.m., Tammy took a bite and let the silence stretch. Then she said, you ever think maybe they need someone who doesn't speak spreadsheet? Elena looked down at her hands. I don't want to mess it up, you won't. But what if Elena? Tammy's voice cut through, gentle, but solid. What's really got you scared? A job? Or Elena blink what Tammy raised an eyebrow to see her. Mr. Tall, pressed and mysterious. Elena opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. She glanced away, cheeks warming. Tammy smiled to herself. You can't lie to me. I've been watching you spin since the coffee incident. I don't get him. Elena said finally. He's this polished, perfect executive who reads patient files like novels and talks about honesty like it's a strategy. And somehow, he knows my name. He saw me dance alone in a hallway, and instead of making fun of me, he gave me a folder and asked for the truth. Tammy stirred her cobbler. Maybe he's just smart enough to know where the truth lives. Elena looked out the window, where Spanish moss hung like lace in the trees. A breeze swayed through the branches. It felt like the world was shifting just a little. And she wasn't sure she was ready. Chapter D. The next day, she stood outside Graham's office again, folder in hand. Her sneakers squeaked faintly against the marble floor. She knocked. Once the door opened, almost instantly, Elena, he said. Stepping back, she noticed again. He always made space for her physically, conversationally. It disarmed her more than charm. Ever could I read it? She said, holding up the folder twice. He waited. And I think I can help, but I need to do it my way. He nodded. That's the only reason I asked. She exhaled. Okay. Then he smiled. There's a staff meeting on Friday. Internal department leads. No press, no board. Would you be willing to share a 10-minute perspective from the floor? Elenina blinked. You wanted to speak in a room full of people who've actually taken business classes. Graham walked his desk and picked up a small notebook. I've heard doctors talk about revenue metrics and floor expansion plans, but not once has someone mentioned the nurse who sat with the woman crying over her mother's stroke, or the tech who stayed late because a kid was afraid of sleeping alone in the pediatric unit. That's the story we're missing. Elena stared at him, uncertain whether to be flattered or afraid. What if I freeze? She asked, almost whispering, then you'll breathe. And I'll be right there. Something about the way he said made the room feel smaller, softer. She looked away. Quickly, I'll think about it. He nodded. That's fair. And just when she reached the door, his voice stopped her. Elena. She turned. Why were you dancing that night? Her mouth parted slightly. She hadn't expected to ask. She hesitated. Because I needed to remember I was still here, still me some nights. It's the only way I feel real. He didn't smile. He didn't make a joke. He just nodded like he understood. And in that moment she believed. He did later. That night Elena sat on the edge of Walter Jameson's hospital bed, adjusting the pillow behind his back. The jazz musician had been in and out of recovery for weeks, and they developed a routine. You look like you're holding a secret. Walter said, his voice scratchy but warm. I might be able to tell me, or make me guess. She sighed. They asked me to speak at a meeting, management stuff. Walter raised an eyebrow. And you said yes? I said, I think about you, afraid a little, maybe a lot. Walter chuckled. You know what the first rule of jazz is? Elenina smiled. Faintly, let me guess, don't spill coffee on the conductor. He laughed then. Winced hand to his side close. He said, rule number 1 is don't wait for perfect notes. Just start playing. She looked at him, letting that sink in. You think I can do this? She asked. He looked at her like she just asked whether birds can fly. Girl, you already are. Friday came too fast. The conference room was packed. Department heads, coordinators, a few residents pretending to understand the spreadsheets. In front of them, Elena stood near the back. Folder clutched to her chest. Her heart was doing so. Heart echoed in her ears. Graham spotted her from across the room, gave her a nod, just that. But it anchored her. They called her name. She walked to the front. Her sneakers squeaked again. Someone shifted in their chair. Someone else cleared their throat. Elena stood behind the podium and looked at the room, looked at the suits, the pens, the perfectly organized documents. Then she set the folder down, took a breath. I'm not here to talk about numbers, she said. I'm here to talk about noise, the kind you don't hear from up here, like the sound a kid makes when they're for beeps and no one comes for 10 minutes, or the sigh of a nurse skipping lunch to cover a shift, or the silence in a hallway where someone just passed and no one had the time to stop and say goodbye to the room. When still I've mopped blood off floor tiles, I've held hands in the middle of the night because families couldn't get there in time. I've danced alone in an empty hallway because it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. She glanced up, saw Graham watching her, not with surprise, with respect. I don't have solutions. I don't have degrees in leadership or finance, but I do have ears. And if we start listening to people doing the quiet work, we might just find the answers we've been looking for. Silence stretched. Then someone clapped, then another. And then the room was full of sound applause. Elena stepped back, breath shaking. And through it all, one pair of eyes never left her. Graham's. And this time she didn't look away. The applause still rang in Elena's ears long after the meeting ended. She sat on a bench in the hospital garden courtyard, her back to the roses, folder her lap, hands still trembling, to take in everything in her to get through that speech. Every nerve, every breath, every ounce of vulnerability she hadn't meant to spill into that room. But she'd done it now. The adrenaline had vanished, and what was left was something quieter, heavier. Elenina. She turned. Graham stood just outside the gardens. Row iron gate, his jacket draped casually over one arm, sleeves rolled up, a glint of something unreadable in his eyes. Do you mind if I join you? She motioned to the open spot beside her without a word. He sat, leaving just enough space to be polite, but not distant. You were remarkable, he said. She shook her head, eyes fixed on the brick path. I was terrified you didn't show it. Oh, I did. My hands were shaking so bad. I nearly dropped the folder again. He laughed softly. Still, you said things no one in that room had the courage to say. She didn't respond, not immediately. The breeze moved gently through the courtyard, stirring the soft pink petals at her back. I wasn't trying to be brave. She said, finally, I just couldn't lie, not after everything I've seen here. Graham studied her for a moment, the way someone might study a photograph they've looked at a H 100 times, but only just started to. Understand, Elena, may I ask you something? She nodded. What made you stay in this job? With the hours, the pressure, the lack of recognition. Why haven't you left like so many others? Have her chest tightened. The answer came to quickly, like it had been waiting there all along. Because someone has to stay, she said. Quietly, someone has to care. When the system forgets, the words sat between them for a moment, heavier than silence. Then Graham said, softer than before, I didn't expect you to change anything. I just wanted insight. But you've started something. She looked at him, unsure whether to feel proud or panicked. I didn't mean to make waves. The people who make the biggest waves, he said, are the ones who never plan to pause. And he added, almost too casually, would you join me for lunch? Not as a consultant, just to talk. Elena's heart stuttered. She looked at him fully, now his tie loose and his eyes calm. But searching, there was nothing formal in his posture, nothing executive in his tone. It wasn't a meeting. It was an invitation. I don't usually eat during the day's shift, she said. Try to sound like I'm learning that about nurses, but I could make an exception. He smiled. I'll take that as a yes. The cafeteria was quieter than usual mid-afternoon lull. Most people were back in meetings or on rounds. Graham stood in line with her tray in hand. No assistant, no security, no one trailing behind him in tailored suits. You know they're watching us, Ella and Nina murmured as she picked up a bowl of fruit. I know, he replied, grabbing a bottle of water. Let them. That's easy for you to say. You're not the one who will end up as a meme in the staff group chat. He smirked. You're assuming I haven't already been one. She looked at him surprised. He nodded. I wore mismatched socks. Once they're still circulating, she laughed. And just like that, the tightness in her chest loosened. They sat in the far corner of the dining area near a window overlooking the courtyard for a while. They just ate quietly, comfortably. Then Graham asked, what did you mean in your speech about dancing to feel real? She hesitated, spoon paused midair. I guess I meant. She set it down. Sometimes you get so lost in caretaking routines and trying to be what everyone needs that you forget who you are. Dancing was a way to remind myself that I still had a self, one that didn't belong to the hospital or the patients or the shifts. Just me. Nodded slowly. I envy that. You envy dancing in a hallway with a mop. I envy having something that pulls you back to yourself. She looked at him, then really looked, and for the first time saw more than the CEO. She saw the man, and he looked tired, lonely. Even don't you have that? She asked. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. I used to before my father passed, before the board, before every decision felt like a battle. There was a silence between them, not awkward, but honest. Then she said gently, maybe you need to find a new way to dance. He smiled at that. Maybe I do. Back in the recovery ward, the gossip engine was running hot. Kayla leaned over to Tammy at the nurse's station. Okay, is it true? Did she go to lunch with him? Tammy didn't look up. I don't traffic in gossip. Kayla blinked. You've literally built your reputation on grapevine facts and cafeteria truths. Tammy smirked. I said, I don't traffic in it. Doesn't mean I don't keep a well-stocked pantry. Kayla leaned closer. Well, Tammy finally looked up, one eyebrow arched. She had a Caesar salad. He had grilled chicken. They laughed in report. Kayla gasped. You saw them? I see everything, Tammy said, tapping her pen to her temple. Then more serious, let her have her piece. Kayla, you don't know the weight that girl carries. Sometimes the last thing someone needs is your curiosity dressed as concern. Kayla bit her lip, chastised. Tammy softened. She's not chasing anything. She's just finally being seen. That's allowed. That night, Ella and Nina returned home and stood barefoot in her kitchen, staring at the kettle. As it whistled, her phone buzzed on the counter. New email. GW. Thank you for lunch, for honesty, for reminding me what matters. Graham. She read it 3 times and set the phone down, wrapped her arms around herself, and closed her eyes for the first time in a long time. She felt like something was unfolding, not fast, not wild, but slow, steady, and real. And maybe, just maybe, worth the risk. The next morning, Elena stepped into the staff lounge, only to be greeted by an unexpected sight. The television, usually reserved for daytime reruns or muted news, was playing a slideshow hospital fundraiser clip set to soft piano music, volunteers handing out blankets, nurses laughing with patients, kids painting murals. She was mid-reach for her coffee when the next frame appeared. It was her, not posed, not filtered, just a still from security footage, her mid-spin mop in one hand, her ponytail caught midair, a ghost of a smile on her face. Elena froze. The room fell quiet. Tammy stood behind her, arms crossed. I didn't know they had footage. Elena said, her voice barely audible. They pulled clips for the donor video. Tammy replied, apparently someone insisted your dance stay and said it was the heart of the whole thing. Ella Nina's mouth went dry. Someone? Tammy raised an eyebrow. Starts with a G, ends with your boss, has a crush. Ella Nina's heart knocked hard against her chest. Tammy didn't grin. She didn't smirk, her tone shifted low, steady. I'm serious, honey. This kind of thing, it doesn't happen by accident. He's watching, but not in a bad way, in a noticing way. And not just to the whole floor, he's showing people what matters. The screen changed to Walter playing a harmonica for two children in wheelchairs and to Kayla, braiding a little girl's hair during treatment. Evelina exhaled slowly. I don't know if I'm ready to be a symbol. You already are. Might as well pick the pose. She turned to leave, but Tammy caught her arm gently. Just promise me you'll protect your heart. While all this changes, he seems good, but Power's a tricky dance partner. Evelina nodded. I promise. Later that afternoon, she found herself on the executive floor again, not by invitation, by curiosity. She told herself she needed to return a report in person, but when she stepped off the elevator and saw him in his office, standing with someone else, something shifted in her. A woman, tall, elegant, perfectly composed, stood beside Graham's desk laughing, as if the air belonged to her. She wore a white blazer and a confidence that didn't ask permission. Elena paused outside the glass wall, just long enough to catch the way the woman touched Graham's sleeve, just long enough to see the way his expression softened. She turned before they could see her, walk briskly back toward the elevator, throat tight. She didn't even realize she was holding her breath until the doors closed behind her. Back on the floor, Evelina tried to focus, but everything felt off. Charts were harder to read, conversations blurred. Even Kayla's endless questions about floor placement felt like background noise. She went to check on Walter, needing a familiar anchor, but his room was empty. Discharge papers signed the bed already stripped. She stood in the doorway longer than necessary. Gone. Everyone leaves eventually, she thought. Hey, she turned Graham. He looked surprised to find her there. I stopped by your desk. They said you were on the floor. I needed movement, she replied. They stood in the hallway between patients and paperwork, where things always felt more real. He gestured toward the room. He wanted to say goodbye. But you were with a new admit. I know. I didn't think he'd leave so soon. He left a note for you. Graham handed her a folded napkin, scribbled in shaky pen, keep dancing, even if no one's watching, especially. Then Evelina folded the napkin carefully, her chest tightened, but she smiled. Graham watched you, okay? She nodded, but her voice said something else. I saw you earlier. He tilted his head. Saw me in your office. With someone understanding flickered in his eyes. Victoria, the name landed like a cold glass of water in her lap. She's a surgeon. He added, we were involved years ago before I moved here. Elena looked away. You don't owe me explanations. Maybe not, but I don't want things left to assumption. Either. Her fingers tightened around the napkin. She's impressive. She's complicated. He said simply, and she's here to pitch a new partnership for surgical outreach. That's all. Elena nodded, pretending that settled things, but something lingered in her tone. Whatever this is between us, it's complicated too. Graham stepped closer, voice low. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. Her eyes flicked to his. And if I never am, I'll still listen when you speak. I'll still back your work. And I'll still be grateful you spilled coffee on me. She exhaled a laugh, a real one, but it trembled on the edges. I don't want to be part of some office legend. She said, I want to be useful to you. Or he said, in ways you don't even see. Yet a nurse rushed by with a rolling vitals cart. The moment broke, but not completely. Graham touched her elbow, brief. Respectful, take your time. I'm not going anywhere. And then he walked away, leaving her standing in the middle of everything, still holding a napkin and a heart full of questions. That night, Evelina sat in her kitchen, lights low, slippers on, and tea cooling beside her. She stared at the hospital video on her phone. Her dance played in silence. She watched her own laughter, her unfiltered movement, the way her hands spun the mop like it was an extension of herself. She watched as if it was someone else, and maybe it was a version of herself that hadn't yet been seen or chosen. She hit pause. The screen froze mid-laugh, mid-spin, mid-everything. Then she whispered to no one, what if I'm not ready? And deeper still, what if I never will be? It had been 3 days since Elena saw Graham in the hallway, and nearly 3 days since she'd heard his voice. Not that she was counting. Work was a blur. Rounds, charts, call buttons. She told herself the silence was a relief, less confusion, fewer questions. But somewhere beneath her calm professionalism was a pulse of unease she couldn't quite shake. She walked into the staff meeting room 10 minutes early, expecting a quiet seat by the back window. Instead, she found a room already buzzing, and at the center of it, Dr. Victoria Hale. Victoria stood confidently in front of the projector, flipping through slides like she'd been rehearsing them. In her sleeper blazer was cream, her heels sharp, and her voice carried easily even when she wasn't speaking. Elena hovered by the doorway, caught off guard. Tammy appeared at her side like she'd been summoned by instinct. Oh, look, the Ice Queen's holding court. She presented to the care leads. Elena asked. Tammy hummed. Apparently, she's proposing a surgical efficiency Initiative 1 that involves reallocating certain nursing resources translation. Less help for more work. Before Elena could respond, Graham entered from the side. Hallway calm, composed. His eyes skimmed the room quickly and stopped the moment they found Elena. Their gaze held in Victoria's voice, sliced to the moment. Graham, she called casual but pointed, we're ready to begin. He nodded, giving Elena a small glance before joining the front of the room. Whatever passed between them was brief, careful. Elena took a seat 2 rows from the back. She didn't know what she expected, but she hadn't expected to feel so removed. Jack, the presentation was polished, data-driven, persuasive, charts, percentages, cost savings. Victoria's voice never faltered, her language tailored for boardrooms, not break rooms. Our plan, streamlined surgical prep, while minimizing non-essential nurse labor. Overlap, she said with practiced ease. Elena's brow furrowed. Non-essential, her hand shot up before she could stop herself. Victoria blinked. Yes, Elena stood. Sorry, just for clarification, when you say non-essential labor, are you referring to the nurses in pre-op and recovery? Victoria tilted her head. That's correct. The goal is to minimize redundancy. Elena folded her arms. You mean the nurses who manage terrified patients, confuse families, medication checks, and last-minute complications before you even walk into the OR? A soft murmur swept the room. Victoria smiled thin. Of course, every role is valued, but in terms of operational flow, no, I get it. Elena said, her voice calm but steady. You just want us invisible until the numbers show up. Victoria's gaze cooled. Elena, I appreciate your passion, but this isn't personal. Elena stepped forward, heart pounding. Everything about patient care is personal. That's what keeps people alive. Between your incisions and your closures. Graham stood before it escalated further. That's enough. Everyone turned. He didn't raise his voice, but his tone didn't leave room for argument. Victoria's posture straightened, hands still poised on a remote. Elena, thank you for your perspective. Graham added, eyes briefly meeting hers. Let's take a 10-minute break. Elena didn't move at first, then she grabbed her notepad and stepped out, chest tight, in the hallway. She leaned against the wall, drawing slow breaths through her nose. Anger and something sharp, or something that stung, pressed behind her ribs. She didn't hear footsteps until Graham appeared beside her. That was brave. He said softly, I wasn't trying to be brave. She said, eyes still forward. I was trying not to let people disappear in a PowerPoint. She got under your skin. She tried to erase mine. A silence stretched between them. Then quieter, Elena asked, is she why you pulled back? Graham hesitated. No. She looked at him. But she made me realize how exposed everything's gotten. He added, the story, the hallway footage. Us, there's no us. Elena said quickly, too quickly. He didn't flinch, maybe, but the idea of you being used or hurt because of it, I didn't know how to protect you. Without making it worse, I don't need protection. She said, throat tight. I know. He said, but I care. That's not a strategy. That's just the truth. She turned to him fully, now frustration. And something more tangled in her chest. You say all the right things, she whispered. But I don't know where I stand with you, Graham. I can't be part of some quiet secret just because it's inconvenient for a board meeting or your reputation. I'm not ashamed of you. He said instantly. Then why does it feel like I'm always standing just outside the room? His jaw clenched, but his voice stayed calm. Because I spent years making sure the room didn't have space for distraction, for anything unpolished. And you walked in dancing and ruined the whole system I built to survive this job. Elena stared at him, stunned. I don't regret it, he added, but I'm still learning how to live in the new one. Neither of them moved down the hall. The meeting resumed. Doors opened, voices stirred. Elena stepped back. I have patience. They don't wait for emotional clarity. He nodded. Once didn't stop her. She'd walk away before she could change her mind. By late afternoon, the staff lounge was quieter, just her and Tammy organizing supply bins in tired silence. Word is Tammy said gently. Victoria's proposal got tabled. Too many objections, yours included. Elena gave a small nod. You, okay, Tammy added. I don't know, Elena. Admitted, I feel like I just stepped out of something. I never fully stepped into. Tammy slid a bit into the cabinet. Sound about right. They worked in silence for a beat. Then Tammy said, you know, truth has this awful habit of leaving you messy before it frees you. Elena exhaled. Yeah, it's real messy right now. Then maybe you're close to whatever comes after the truth. Elena didn't reply. She just kept sorting gauze and gloves, but her hands moved slower because something inside her had started to ache, not just with confusion, but with possibility. And that was even harder to hold. The reins started sometime after midnight, soft and rhythmic, against the windows of Charleston Gray's. Elena had just finished transferring her last patient and was sitting at the nurse's station with a cooling cup of tea and a stack of charts. She couldn't bring herself to finish the Hallway was unusually quiet, no code calls, no alarms, just a hush of sleeping patients, and the muted echo of rainfall. She let her head rest on the back of the chair for a moment, eyes closed, then came the sound, footsteps measured familiar. She didn't have to look up to know who it was. "I thought you didn't visit the floors during night shift," she said without opening her eyes. Graham's voice was low. "I couldn't sleep." She opened her eyes slowly. He stood there in dark slacks and a light blue dress, shirt sleeves rolled up, no ties. Something about him looked more worn than usual, but not tired, just exposed. "Maybe you should try dancing in a hallway." She offered. He smiled, faintly. "Tried that. Turns out I'm less graceful than you think." Elena raised an eyebrow. "That's bold, assuming I'm graceful." He stepped closer, then leaned against the counter across from her, folding his arms. "The first time I saw you," he said, "you were spinning around like the world didn't weigh anything." She held his gaze. "The first time I saw you, you were covered in espresso and still managed to look unbothered. I was completely thrown. You didn't show it. That's what I've been trained to do, hide the false silence stretched between them." Elenina turned her attention to the rain-streaked window. "I don't know what we're doing," she said, barely louder than a whisper. He didn't rush to answer. When he did, his voice was careful, honest. "Neither do I, but I know I don't want to keep pretending I don't look. For you, every time I walk into a room," she swallowed, "it's not that simple. I know I don't want to be a footnote in someone else's story. You're not. If anything, I'm a chapter in yours." That stopped her. She looked at him, then really looked, and she saw the weight in his eyes, the cracks and perfection, the loneliness he carried with such precision. "I thought you were the kind of man who needed control," she said softly. "I was, and now I'm trying to learn when to let go." Her breath caught in her throat. He stepped closer, slow and careful, like he was afraid to startle her. "You once said dancing was how you remembered you were still real." He said, "You made me wonder if I've been living on autopilot for too long." She didn't answer, couldn't. His eyes searched hers. "Would you have dinner with me?" "Just dinner, no speeches, no hidden agendas." Elenina blinked. "You're serious, as serious as I've ever been about anything that wasn't in a boardroom." She leaned back slightly, folding her arms across her chest, not as a barrier, but to steady herself. "What if we're not built for this? Then we find out together." She studied him in silence. "Not tonight," she said. Finally, his expression didn't falter. "Whenever you're ready." And just like that, he gave her space. He stepped back, offering a small nod before turning toward the elevator. But before he reached, and she called after him, "Graham." He stopped. "Why now?" she asked. "Because you make it impossible to keep living like nothing matters." Then he was gone. Later that shift, Elenina sat in the quiet of the recovery ward, lights dimmed, heart still pounding from a conversation that didn't belong to any checklist or shift report. Kayla wandered in with a bag of lemon cookies and a confused expression. "Hey, you good?" Elena looked up, startled. "What, you're staring at a wall like it insulted your grandmother?" Elena laughed under her breath. "Just thinking." Kayla sat beside her, wanting to ask, no wanting to not ask, but still hang out so you don't spiral into a dramatic mental monologue. Exactly that. They sat in silence for a while, breaking cookies in half, watching the rain blur the world outside. Then Kayla said, "You know what scares me the most about growing up?" Elena tilted her head. "It's not the bills or the careers or the responsibilities. It's realizing how often love doesn't look the way you thought it would." Elenina didn't speak. "Sometimes it shows up in the middle of a shift." Kayla continued, wearing a coffee-stained shirt and a head full of rules, "and it wrecks you in the best way." Elena's eyes burned, but she smiled. "You're too young to talk like that," she murmured. "I read a lot of poetry," Kayla said, grinning, "and I watch people." Dangerous combination. They laughed quietly together, and as the sun began to rise behind the rain clouds, Elenina let herself believe for just a moment that maybe the next chapter of her life was allowed to be uncertain. Maybe it was supposed to be, because something real was blooming, not fast, but deeply. Elena adjusted the hem of her navy blue blouse for the 5th time as she stared at her reflection in the elevator's mirrored wall. She hadn't worn anything. That wasn't scrubs in over 3 weeks. It felt strange, like she was impersonating someone else. A woman who had time for real meals, real makeup, and complicated feelings. The fundraiser gala was supposed to be low-key. According to the email, Graham's assistant had sent cocktail attire hospital donors a slideshow about community outreach, nothing groundbreaking. And yet her stomach had been doing quiet somersaults since noon. The elevator chimed as the doors opened into the main hall of the Charleston Grace Foundation. The room glowed with warm lights, and soft jazz linen-covered tables circled the space, each adorned with tiny tea candles flickering beside flower arrangements in pale pink and white. It was beautiful. It was overwhelming. Elena, she turned just as Kayla nearly skidded to a stop beside her, wide-eyed and bouncing slightly in her heels. "You look incredible," Kayla whispered, looping her arm through Elena's, like if Grey's Anatomy and Vogue had a crossover episode. Elena laughed softly. "You're ridiculous." Kayla leaned, and "He's already here." And yes, he noticed you walk, and Elena's heart caught, who Kayla gave her a look, even played him now. Before Elena could form a sarcastic, responsive voice came from just over her shoulder. "Excuse me, lady," she turned Graham. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit, no-tie collar, open, relaxed, confident, and somehow more human than ever. "Elena," he said, eyes warm, voice low enough for her to feel it more than hear, "you came." "I was promised cookies and non-profit pitches," she replied, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "How could I resist?" Graham's mouth curved into something half smile, half secret. "There's a seat next to me at the front. If you like." Kayla squeezed Elena's arm. She'd love that. And then she vanished. Graham offered his hand, and Elenina hesitated just long enough to notice it, then took it to Gala, unfolded in waves, speeches, applause, a few donor videos about expansion projects and scholarship programs. But as the lights dimmed for final presentation, Graham leaned toward Elena and whispered, "I haven't seen this one yet." She gave him a sideways glance. Not even the CO gets a preview. Apparently not. The screen flickered to life. Soft piano music began. Photos of Charleston Grace children smiling in pediatric care, nurses tending to elderly patients, a tech giving high fives to a teen in recovery, and then her Elenina dancing. The footage played. Without warning, her spinning mop, twirling earbuds, and oblivious to the camera of the room. When quiet, her stomach dropped. Graham leaned, and "I didn't know they kept that clip," and she sat frozen on. Screen, her laugh lit up the hallway, unfiltered, unbothered, alive. The music swelled, the slideshow faded into black. Then a quote appeared across the screen in white text. "Sometimes healing starts in quiet places. When no one's watching, that's where the hard care lives." EB applause erupted. Elena blinked, stunned. She turned to Graham. "What was that? I added your quote." He said, "They must have left the clip." Her voice cracked. "You didn't tell me. I thought you'd say no, you didn't ask. I'm sorry." She stood quickly. "I need a minute." The applause still rang in her ears as she slipped out into the side hall. Heart racing, the walls felt too close, her throat too tight. Footsteps followed a moment later. Elena, she turned sharply. "You don't get to do that." Graham stopped frowning. "Do what? Use me as some symbol without warning me. First, you don't get to put my face on a screen and then act surprised when I react. I didn't do it to exploit you." Then why? He stepped forward slower now, because people needed to see what care really looks like, not just charts and policy, but UI. "Didn't ask to be seen like that, I know," he said softly, "but the world needs it." She looked at him, eyes shining, but unshed. "Do you know what that felt like, sitting there surrounded by people? I don't know, watching myself dance like a fool. Like, I don't have anything to lose. You don't look like a fool," he said firmly. "You look alive." She shook her head. I looked exposed, and yet no one looked away. That stopped her. The silence between them stretched long and charged. Then he said, "Gentler, Elena, you've been hiding in plain sight since the day I met you. I wasn't trying to put you on a pedestal. I was trying to reflect what was already shining." She folded her arms more to steady herself than to block him. "I don't know if I can be part of your world you already are. What if I fall apart? Then I'll be there when you do." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "What if I let you in and it ruins everything?" Graham took a step closer, his tone like a promise wrapped in breath. "Then we rebuild it together." Elenina looked up at him, unsure if she was falling or finally landing. She didn't move, but she didn't walk away either, and that for now was enough. Monday arrived with the kind of Carolina sun that made the sidewalk shimmer and the air smell like magnolia and coming storms. Elenina stood at the corner of the Charleston Grace courtyard, sipping a lukewarm iced coffee. She hadn't actually wanted, her mind still wrapped around the gala, like it was a dream that hadn't ended properly. She hadn't seen Graham since he'd given her space, and she'd taken it more out of necessity than decision. The image of her dancing projected on that screen for strangers' applaud had settled into her chest like a splinter. She understood the gesture. She even believed his intentions were good. But good intentions still left bruises. Elena, she turned to find Kayla bounding up the path, her badge swinging from her neck, and hair pulled into a high puff of enthusiasm. "Emergency staff meeting, 10 minutes, admin wing," Kayla said between breaths. "Do we know what it's about?" Kayla shrugged. Tammy said it's something major, and she looked tight. "You know that face she makes when she knows something but won't tell you yet." Elenina followed her inside, a knot forming in her stomach. Whatever it was a routine by the time they reached the boardroom. It was standing room, only nurses, techs, even a few department heads, all clustered in tense silence. Tammy caught Elena's eye from across the room, then looked away Quickly, Graham entered from a side door, papers in hand, jaw set. Victoria was already seated at the front. Elenina's chest tightened. Graham stood behind the podium and began, "Thank you all for coming on short notice. This meeting concerns the upcoming structural changes proposed last quarter. After multiple reviews, legal counsel, and administrative feedback, the board will be voting this Friday on a major shift in how leadership roles, particularly those involving patient care insight, are distributed." He paused, eyes sweeping the room. As part of that shift, a new role will be proposed, a patient care liaison designed to represent the voices from the floor in every administrative decision. Murmurs filled the room. Graham continued, "This isn't ceremonial. This role would attend board meetings, sit in on hiring decisions, and provide direct recommendations from staff and patient experience." Now the room buzzed. Someone near the back called out, "Who gets the job?" Victoria stood before Graham could respond. "The board has requested a vote," she said smoothly. "While administration can recommend, the floor will decide. Nominations close Thursday." Graham's expression gave nothing away. Elena's throat went dry. Tammy stepped forward, then voice calm but resolute, "I'd like to nominate Elena Brooks." Every head turned. Elena froze. Kayla's hand shot up. Seconded. Victoria's smile tightened. Noted. Graham met Elena's eyes, but he didn't say her name, and that somehow hurt more than she expected. Elenina sat in the garden after the meeting, heart racing faster than it had in months. She barely noticed the late spring breeze or the whisper leaves above her, just the thrum of too many people expecting something from her that she never asked for. Tammy appeared beside her, silent at first. "You all right?" Elena stared ahead. "I didn't ask for this. You earned it. I didn't want to be nominated." "I know." Elena looked at her. "Then why?" Tammy lowered herself onto the bench with the grace of someone who'd done it 1,000 times under pressure. "Because you're already doing the job. All I did was give a name." Elena rubbed her hands together. "What if I mess it up? Then you'll fix it. That's what we do." Is silence. Then Elena asked, "Why didn't Graham nominate me?" Tammy paused, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Because if he had, everyone would say you got the job for the wrong reasons. He gave you the chance to earn it." Without noise, that made Elena sit still for a long moment. She hated that it made sense, and hated even more that she needed to hear it deeply. Later that night, she found herself walking toward the East Wing hallway, where it all started. The floor was quiet, the same overhead lights hummed faintly, no music, no mop. But the memory lived there, her body. Remember the spin, the weightlessness, the choice to be joyful even when no one noticed, except someone had a voice echoed softly behind her. I watched that footage at least 5 times. She turned. Graham leaned against the wall, just outside the stairwell, hands in his pockets. I couldn't understand why it moved me so much. He added, "Elenina didn't speak." He stepped forward slowly. Then I realized it was because it was the first time I saw someone not performing, not polishing, just being. She looked at him, something raw in her chest. "I didn't nominate you because I didn't want to own your spotlight," he said. "I wanted you to have it without my shadow. I don't need protection." She said, her voice steadier than it felt. "I know." He said, "That's not why I'm here." "Then why?" "Because I still care a beat." Then another. Elenina took a slow breath. "If I take this role, if I actually win it, things will change, I hope. So for both of us." I know. She stepped closer. Their faces only a breath apart. "Now I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too." But neither of them moved. In that quiet hallway where it all began, surrounded by flickering lights and everything unspoken, Elenina felt the earth shift just a little under her feet, not from falling, but rise. In the boardroom was colder than usual, not in temperature, but in energy. Something stiff lingered in the air, like too many expectations pressed up against the walls. Elenina sat at the far end of the long glass table, palms resting flat, waiting for her name to be called. It was Friday voting day. Across from her sat the other nominee, a department manager from radiology named Mark Leland, kind, competent, a safe candidate. He smiled politely, but his eyes flickered with a kind of distant certainty that unsettled her. Graham hadn't spoken to her all morning. He entered late, walked past her without a glance, and sat down beside Elenina Marsh, the board chair. The message was clear: distance, professionalism. But inside Elena, everything twisted. Elenina tapped her pen against a folder and began, "We're here to finalize the vote for the patient care liaison position. 2 candidates, 1 vote per board member, no deliberation. You've reviewed the packets, heard the staff input. Let's proceed." She passed around small ballots, simple slips of paper. Elena sat motionless, heart hammering in her chest. She'd spent years running on adrenaline, but this was something else. This was exposure, no code to respond and no monitor to silence, only silence, and a choice, one that could rewrite everything. As the votes were collected, she glanced up. Graham was looking at her, and his face said everything. His voice had, "I believe in you. I'm still here." But then Ella Lenina began reading the results. Mark Leland, 6 votes. Applause, Elena Brooks. She hesitated, 9 a breath, caught in Elena's throat for a moment. The words didn't land and applause broke out scattered at first. Then growing staff in the back of the room stood Kayla clapped. Like her life depended on it, Tammy just gave. Her knowing nod like she'd seen it coming all along. But Elena didn't move not until Eleanor's voice cut through the celebration. Congratulations, Miss Brooks, you've earned the seat. You'll begin attending administrative sessions. Starting next week, you'll also report directly to the board, not the executive staff. The statement wasn't casual. It was sharp, deliberate. Elena looked at Graham. He didn't flinch, but something in his posture shifted, and that's when she realized they were separating her from music. Him later that afternoon, Ella Lenina found herself back in the garden alone, or so she thought. You made them listen. Came a voice behind her. She turned. Graham stood under the archway, hands in his pockets, rain threatening the edges of the sky above them. I didn't do it alone, she said. He carried every piece of it. But now I'm cut off from you, from your team, from everything we started together. He stepped closer, voice lower. They want to control what you say before you say it. If I stay too close, they'll say, I'm influencing you. You're the one who started this. She said, eyes locked on as you gave me the fold of the voice, and I'd do it again. He said, but now you can't be in a room when I use it. That's a price. He said, quietly, for now, for now. She repeated, I hate that phrase. He looked away, and something in her broke. A little you told me once that you didn't want to keep living like nothing mattered, she said. But now when it does matter, when I matter, you're suddenly silent. His eyes met hers, pain flickering there. This isn't silent, Elena. This is survival. And what about me? She asked, voice cracking. What do I do now? You speak louder. She closed her eyes. The wind stirred the leaves above them. This feels like goodbye, she whispered. He shook his head. It's not. It's a pause. And the board forces you to choose. I already chose, he said. She looked up startled. I chose this hospital. I chose change. And if that means stepping back. So you can lead, I'll do it as many times as it takes. Ella Lenina blinked back the weight in her eyes, and slowly she reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded napkin Walter had left her keep dancing, even if no one's watching, especially. Then she handed it to Graham. He read it once, then twice, then pressed it into his palm like it was something sacred. I'll be watching, he said softly, even when I'm not in the room. And with that, he walked away, not as a seal, not even as a man in love, but as someone let her go so she could rise. The first time Elena sat in a boardroom as patient care liaison, the room didn't shift for her. No one rose, no one paused their conversation. The seats stayed full, and the glances were polite at best. She slid into her assigned chair at the far end of the table. No placard, no welcome, no nod of recognition. Just her and a leather-bound notebook. She couldn't bring herself to open. She wasn't surprised. She expected the frosted performative. Silence, the way a few department heads leaned in to whisper, just loud enough for her to hear, but it still landed like a weight across her shoulders. Eleanor Marsh called the meeting to order, numbers, updates, staffing, logistics. Elena listened, waited her moment. Was 15 minutes, and she stood, when prompted, and cleared her throat. I spent the last 10 days meeting with recovery nurses, pediatric night shift, ER floaters, and custodial staff. These are the people who live in the margins of the system, the ones who see things you won't find in quarterly reports or satisfaction surveys. Her voice was steady, clear. I've gathered 35 written responses. Each outlined specific breakdowns and communication gaps in emotional support for patients post-discharge and the recurring issue of tech delays during urgent transfers. She looked up, then directly at Eleanor. I've highlighted 3 of the most immediate problems. If we act now, we can save money and prevent mistakes. Eleanor nodded stiffly. Please submit that in writing. I already have, but I'd like to discuss it now. The room shifted barely, but enough. Graham said nothing. He didn't need it. She stood alone. I'll circulate the report again. Ella Lenina said, her voice unshaken, but respectfully silenced. From this table is why I'm here in the first place. A pause, a long one. Then someone down the line murmured, I'd like to see that data. Another followed, me too. The meeting moved forward, but the energy had changed. They didn't lean away anymore. Chaka. After the meeting, Elena walked out into the corridor, her legs finally registering the tension. They'd held. The sun filtered into the long windows, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something warm settle in her chest. But just as she rounded the corner, she nearly collided with Victoria. The 2 women stood barely inches apart. Elena, Victoria said, crisp and unreadable. Dr. Hale. Victoria crossed her arms. You made quite the impression today. I wasn't aiming for that, Elena replied. I was aiming for change. You do realize you've put yourself in a difficult position. I'm not afraid of difficult, no, Victoria said. But you should be prepared for lonely. That landed harder than Elena. Expectant Victoria leaned in slightly. The higher the platform, the fewer people are allowed to stand on it with you. Then she walked away. Elena stood in the hallway, a beat longer, her fingers curled around the folder. She hadn't realized she was still holding lonely. She thought not wrong, but not untrue either. That evening, Elena returned to the East Wing for the first time in days. The shift nurses greeted her with quiet nods, a kind that meant, "We're watching, we're listening, we're not sure what you are now." She pulled Kayla aside near the break room. "Can you help me organize a staff forum?" Nothing formal, just coffee, snacks, a space where people can say whether they're too tired or afraid to put in writing. Kayla blinked. "You want to hear more complaints? I want to know where the real pressure lives. It doesn't show up in memos." Kayla grinned. "You really are trying to fix this place." Elena smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm just trying to make sure no one feels invisible." Around 10 that night, after most of the halls had gone quiet, Elena found herself walking to the garden again. She didn't expect to see him there, but Graham was sitting on the bench near the fountain, blazer folded beside him, tie gone, shirt sleeves rolled back. She slowed, stopped. "I thought you stopped coming here," she said softly. "I didn't want to make things harder for you. They already are." He stood, looked at her, not as a man carrying 1,000 silent decisions, but just as Graham, "I wanted to tell you the way you held that room today, don't," she said gently. "Don't compliment me from a distance." His mouth opened, then closed again. She stepped closer. "You told me this was a pause, but you've been living in it like it's permanent. I didn't know how to be close without making it worse." "Then ask me," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Ask me what I need." Graham stared at her, something raw flickering in his expression. "What do you need, Elena?" She took a shaky breath. "To not feel like I climbed this alone. I was behind you every step, I know. But it's not the same." A silence stretched between them, honest, unforgiving. Then Graham reached into his pocket and pulled out the napkin, crease worn from being held too many times. "I read this every morning," he said, "to remind myself that leadership isn't just about decisions, it's about courage. And I've been following yours." Her eyes welled, but she didn't look away. "I'm still here," he said, softer even. "If I have to love you quietly for now." Elena's breath caught, and this time when she stepped forward, it wasn't defiance, it was trust. She didn't speak, she just reached for his hand, and in the middle of that darkened gardenware, silence at once felt like a wall. She felt something else take its place. Belonging. The letter arrived on a Thursday. It was slipped into Elena's staff mailbox, tucked between 2 HR memos and a cafeteria menu. No return address, just her name written in neat slanted handwriting on the front. She almost tossed it aside, but something about the paper, cream colored thick, made her pause. She opened it slowly. "Elena, I don't know if you'll remember me, but you sat with my mother the night she passed you. Held her hand when I couldn't make it in time. She always talked about you, the nurse who hummed when she cleaned the room, who brought her extra crackers, and didn't treat her like a burden. You gave her dignity. In her final hours, you gave me peace. I watched your speech online. Last week, I saw you on that fundraiser video. It's strange you were in our lives for such a short time, but somehow you changed the way I think about people who care for others without asking for anything back. Thank you for what you did and for what you keep doing." Andrew, our Jameson Walter's grandson. Elena's fingers trembled as she folded the letter. She sat down on a bench outside the staff entrance, right beneath the overgrown ivy wall, and let herself cry for the first time in weeks, not because of pain, but because someone had noticed. Someone remembered. Shout. That afternoon, she carried a letter with her into her next floor meeting. Kayla spotted the envelope and raised an eyebrow. "Ooh, is that from a mysterious CEO who totally pretends not to be in love with you in meetings, but then stares like he's memorizing your breathing patterns?" Elena gave her a look. Kayla grinned. "No, just me who sees that. It's from Walter's grandson." Elena said, voice soft. Kayla sobered instantly. "You okay?" Elena nodded. "Better than okay." Tammy appeared behind her, a clipboard in hand, and a knowing glance. "You gonna share the good news, or do we have to start rumors again?" "I was thinking about reading it aloud," Elena said, "at the start of the staff forum." Tammy smirked. "Lord, that'll have people crying till their pudding cup's good," Elena said, smiling. "Now, maybe they'll remember why they started doing this work." Tammy stepped closer. "You've changed this place." You know, Elena looked down. "Sometimes I wonder if it changed me more." That's how it works. By evening, the break room was full staff from every department. Surgery, pediatrics, janitorial, admin stood shoulder to shoulder, plates of cookies and hand coffee brewing in the background. Elena stood at the center, heart pounding like it had the first night. She danced alone in the hallway, but this time she wasn't alone. She cleared her throat. "I know this wasn't mandatory, and it's late, so I won't take much of your time, but I got a letter today from a patient's family, And I think it belongs to all of you. She read it, every word. And when she finished, the room was so still it felt sacred. Someone sniffled near the microwave. Then Kayla clapped just once then. Again, and the room followed, but it wasn't. Applause. It was gratitude. Graham found her outside an hour later, standing by the garden's edge, the wind catching her hair as the first stars emerged overhead. I missed the speech, he said, stepping quietly behind her. You didn't miss much, she said, still watching the sky. Just a letter and a lot of very emotional cookie consumption. He smiled. I heard you made the facilities guy cry. I think that was the coffee. Actually, a beat of silence. Then he stepped beside her. I saw the board memo. He said they requested your monthly reports be presented without executive review. First, Elenina stiffened. They still don't trust me. No, they don't trust how powerful you're becoming. She turned to him. That's not what I wanted. It's what happens when someone tells the truth long enough, he said. It starts to move people. She looked up at him. Then the softness in his eyes cutting through her frustration. I miss you, she said, his breath caught. I know we can't pretend like this is simple, she continued, but pretending it's nothing, that's worse. He stepped closer. You're not nothing to me, Elena. Her voice broke. Then don't act like you're already preparing for the ending. He reached for her hand, held it between both of his. I'm not preparing for an ending. He said quietly, I'm trying to earn the right to be part of whatever comes next. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time she let them fall. You already are. She whispered, and for the first time since everything began, there was no audience, no pressure, no performance, just some hands folded together beneath a Charleston sky, learning how to stay. The elevator doors opened to the executive floor with a soft chime. But Elena didn't move. She stood there, folder in hand, staring at the hallway, like it was a threshold to another world, a world she now belonged to but still didn't entirely trust. The weight of the board's most recent decision pulsed in the back of her mind. Her patient reports were now being distributed directly to hospital donors. Her words were shaping policy, and politics to power felt both exhilarating and quietly terrifying. She stepped out, heels tapping against the tile, every echo reminding her how far she'd come from the floor below, from a mop and the earbuds from a girl who danced when no one was watching. She wasn't dancing now. She reached Graham's office just as his assistant exited. The woman gave her a subtle nod, less formal than before. Inside, Graham was by the window, sleeves rolled, shirt slightly wrinkled, tie loose on chair. He looked tired but not defeated. He turned when she entered. You got the update? He said. She nodded straight to the donors, no filters. He gave a slow, dry smile. It's what you asked for, is what I fought for, she corrected, setting the folder on his desk. But I didn't realize how fast it would come. They're listening now, Elena, because they know your voice brings the truth. They don't want to dig for themselves. She leaned against the desk's edge. And what happens when they only want the parts that fit their narrative? Graham moved closer. Then you give them the whole story. Anyway, she met his gaze. You still backing me? Always a quiet beat past the kind of silence that meant something had shifted but hadn't landed yet. I got a letter today, Graham added, reaching for a folded sheet of paper from Eleanor. Elena's brows lifted. She stepping down from the board. What she cited conflicting visions for institutional evolution, which in Elenina speak means she's tired of losing to people like us. Elenina blinked. That's huge, he nodded, and her seats being filled by a community advocate, a former patient. She covered her mouth with one hand, stunned. You started that ripple, he said. You. Before she could reply, a knock interrupted them. Benny stepped in slow, as ever, cap in hand, mop trailing behind. Sorry, he muttered, didn't mean to interrupt, just here to check the floor vents. Elenina smiled. You're always right on time. Benny's eyes twinkled. I heard you gave a speech that made 3 directors cry. That's a rumor. He chuckled. Rumors usually hold the truth by the tail. Then he turned to Graham. You mind if I say something, sir? Graham blinked, caught off guard. Course. Benny nodded toward Elena. She leads without asking for a stage, and that kind of leadership, it lasts longer than any title. Then he tipped his cap and shuffled out. Graham looked at her. That man speaks once every 6 fiscal quarters, he said. She laughed quietly. He always says more than the rest of us combined. Graham stepped close. Again, too close to the air to stay neutral. Come with me, he said. We're just trust me. 10 minutes later, they stood in the old chapel wing, an unused part of the hospital being converted into a family reflection space. Stained glass windows, dusted with time, wooden pews stacked in corners, faint echoes of hymns, long faded. Elena stared at the room, lost in it. This used to be sacred, Graham said behind her. Now it's just waiting to matter again. She turned. Why bring me here? Because I want to build something with you, he said. Something lasting, something no one can put their name on, but will carry your fingerprint long after we're gone. She stepped forward slowly. What do you mean, a space for recovery that isn't just medical, for grief, for healing, for joy, a place for families to land when everything else is too much? Her heart Thought did you want to name it after Walter? Don't you? Graham smiled. I want you to name it. She swallowed hard, and I want to do it together. The space around them felt heavier, suddenly fuller. She looked at him, a man who had once been just a distant silhouette on a boardroom schedule, now standing in front of her like a chapter she hadn't dared to write. Until now, you're not afraid of what the board will say anymore, no? He said, they already underestimated what happens when someone dances in a hallway and dares to stay standing afterward. Her throat tightened. Graham, I still don't know where this goes. He said, but I know I want to keep walking with you toward it. She took his hand, not with hesitation, but with certainty, and in the quiet of that forgotten room, two people stood among the echoes of what was, and began laying down the shape of what could be. The sun filtered through the chapel's stained glass windows, painting soft patches of color across the floor. Elena stood in the center of the newly transformed space, no longer forgotten, no longer empty. The wood had been polished, cushions now lined the pews. A wall of photographs stretched along the back. Corner portraits of patients, caregivers, and quiet moment of healing at the front of plaque had been installed, modest but strong. The Walter Jameson Reflection Room, for those who gave care and those who received it. Elena reached out and traced her fingers along the engraved words. The room smelled of lavender and fresh wood polish. Outside, volunteers were stringing up lights for the evening ceremony. It was opening day. Graham appeared behind her, holding 2 mugs of tea. They're expecting you in 10 minutes, he said, offering one. I needed a minute with him. She replied, nodding toward the plaque. Graham followed her gaze and smiled. He'd have been proud of you. He already was, she said softly. He just never said it like this. They sipped their tea in silence, both looking around the room that felt so different now from the first time they'd stepped into it together. Are you ready? Graham asked. Elena gave a slow nod. I think I am, but you go first. He arched a brow. You're the CEO, you're the soul of the hospital. She gave him a look. Fine. He said, smiling. We'll walk in together. They moved through the garden path that led to the courtyard where the event had already begun. Nurses' board, members, former patients, donors, and volunteers filled the seats. There was a stage, modest and floral setup under the oaks. Tammy stood near the front, clipboard in hand, wearing lipstick and a fire in her eyes. She saw Elena and waved her forward. You better be ready, girl. They brought news crews. Ella and Nina laughed, of course. There, you got 5 minutes to get your speech face on. As Tammy walked off, Kayla came bounding over with a wide grin. I printed your speech just in case you freeze. Thank you. Elena said, taking the folded pages, but I'm not using it. Kayla blinked. What I'm speaking from memory and heart. Kayla gave a theatrical gasp. You become dangerous. Elena turned toward the stage. Let's hope so. The murmurs in the audience hushed as Graham stepped up to the microphone first. He welcomed the crowd with grace and a voice that sounded warmer than usual. He spoke of legacy, of the quiet strength of caregivers of Walter, and of change. Then he stepped back, and Elena took his place. For a second, all she could hear was her own breath. Then she looked out across the sea of faces, some familiar, many not, and let the words come. I'm not here today as someone who had a perfect plan. She began. I didn't dream of a title or a podium or even a plaque with my words on it. I dreamed of small things, a patient breathing easier, a tired nurse being heard, a hallway that didn't feel like a tunnel of pause. I danced once in this hospital. When no one was watching, I thought I was alone. Turns out someone was. Laughter rippled gently through the crowd. That moment changed everything, not because of the attention it brought, but because of what it reminded me, that sometimes the quietest acts hold the most meaning, that care is often invisible, that leadership doesn't always look like command, sometimes it looks like presence. She looked down briefly, then back up, voice steadier. Now this room we're opening today isn't just for memory, it's for reset, for breathing, for being human, inside a place that often demands we forget. How she closed her hands around the mic. We built something that outlives a shift or a season, and if I've learned anything through this strange, beautiful journey, it's that every act of compassion has the power to echo. The applause came slow, then full. She stepped back, heart full, eyes stinging. Graham met her at the stairs. You didn't just speak, he said quietly. You delivered something sacred. She smiled. I learned from the best. Tammy came over next, holding tissues and pretending not to need one herself. You made me cry in front of donors. She muttered, do you know how long it took me to wear mascara again? Nina laughed and hugged her, and in the middle of the applause, the candles being lit and the slow settling of something finished, and whole Benny approached. He handed her a tiny envelope. No words, just a nod. She opened it. As he walked away, inside was a slip of paper in his clean, careful print. You turned the hallway into a home. Her throat tightened again. Hours later, when the event had faded and the guests began to leave, Graham found in the courtyard. The sky had gone lavender, the last sliver of sun tucked behind the chapel roof. Come with me, he said, extending a hand. She took it. They walked back in the hallway where it had all started. The east wing, the floors were newly waxed. The light overhead flickered once gently. And then he pulled out his phone. He tapped a button in the hallway filled with music. An old jazz instrumental, the kind Walter would have played. Elena froze. "You remember the song?" She whispered. He nodded. "I promised myself. At this moment, ever came we'd do it right." He held out his hand again. She didn't hesitate. They danced slow, a little off rhythm, just like the first time, but this time they weren't alone. A few staff clapped from the break room door. Someone snapped a photo. Kayla's voice whispered behind them, "Full circle." And Elena smiled through it all because she hadn't just been seen, she had stayed, and in doing so she changed everything. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either. Thank you for watching the story to the end. If you enjoyed the story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next.